I'm very happy to introduce my friend Tom Millar. Tom is the Planning and Design Division Director for Salt Lake City Public Lands, for the Salt Lake City Public Lands Department. I first met Tom about a dozen years ago. He's actually kind of shaped your experience here in Provo. He was one of the architects of the Provo Bicycle Master Plan back in 2013. And I first met Tom at a Utah Bike Summit. We're not sure exactly which summit. And so he is an ally when it comes to my advocacy and activism outside of work with Bike Walk Provo. And I'm happy to give him a Bike Walk Provo sticker. This may not look like much, but he was very happy to hear that I would be giving him a sticker. So with no further ado, here's a sticker. And here is Tom Millar. And we look forward to your questions and comments at the end. And then don't forget to grab a donut. And some of these donuts are shaped like wheels of a bicycle, so we're on theme. So, Tom.
All right, test to see if that's volume okay for everybody. Great, yeah, they don't sell these. You have to get them out of a plastic bag from Aaron. Like Aaron said, my name is Tom. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about kind of my professional journey, but always kind of focusing on that kind of personal aspect, community aspect of what I've done. I'm going to spend probably the bulk of my time talking about how different projects that I've worked on have engaged the public in shaping their infrastructure projects in unique ways, focusing on one of them. And then at the end, would like to talk to you kind of about my why, like what motivates me, and which brings me to the very important disclaimer at the bottom of this slide that I do feel necessary to repeat. I will probably talk about some personal beliefs and opinions today that you shouldn't take as the gospel from Salt Lake City government. So just that disclaimer that what I say today is kind of the breadth and width of my personal and professional experience, not just where I'm at right now. But like Aaron said, my current position is as the Director of Planning and Design for Salt Lake City Public Lands, which is all of the parks, trails, and open spaces, cemeteries, golf courses, and some recreational facilities in Salt Lake City. But that's where I am now. So let's go back in time to where it started. There we go. I grew up in Livermore, California, which is about 40 miles east of San Francisco, and very quickly found one of my passions and what I feel like connected me to my community the most, which is riding a bike. Then kind of moving into adulthood, focused more on community organizing, missionary service, exposure to other types of urban design and governments. My freshman year of college, I was in a joint architecture and urban planning class that was year-long. And I remember going up to one of my professors after and saying, you know, I love all of these things, these, 6 things about this class, and I really hate all of these things, these other, 8 or 9 things. And he told me just very straightforward, it sounds like you hate architecture and you love urban planning. So I said, okay, great, I'll change my major from architecture to urban planning, which is actually the reason why I went to the U in the first place, because BYU didn't have an architecture program. Lo and behold, could have gone to BYU all along. But those influential teachers who gave me kind of opportunities to grow, to even teach classes, really opened up all of those opportunities, relationships that helped to build my career. And like I said, just professionally or educationally, I I was involved in volunteering, in committees, in advocacy organizations, was a bike messenger downtown 20 years ago. And so it wasn't really just like a job, or it wasn't just an education, but it was really that passion that drove me. And I feel like the bicycle is an excellent, it's a literal vehicle, but it's also a metaphorical vehicle that allowed me to access a lot of different parts of my community and being civically engaged that I wouldn't have otherwise. So I started while I was still in college as an intern at the Salt Lake City Transportation Division. I would say that was like the critical turning point, because not only did it have just way more responsibility than they should have given an intern, but it also helped me build those relationships, connect with my community, the one in which I lived and worked, and was most passionate about seeing improve. So I worked on quite a few projects. As a 22-year-old with no degree and no technical experience, we transformed 300 East in Salt Lake City, Utah's first protected bike lane. They asked me when I started my internship if I knew GIS. I did not. And they said, well, would you like to learn it? And I said, sure. And they said, great, we need a bike map for the whole city done in like 4 months before your internship is over. And I was like, all right. So a lot of fake it until you make it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And that's okay. It's okay to step into opportunities that we might not be completely qualified for, as long as we're seeking help and, again, engaging the communities that our work is going to be affecting. After I graduated from college, I went to work at a private firm called Alta Planning and Design. This is consulting work, a pretty small office, 2 people, myself included. And so again, more responsibility way before I should have had it, but then a lot of, big shoes to fill, a lot of opportunities to learn and to grow rather than just going slowly or at the pace that I was ready for. In Provo, worked on quite a few projects. Aaron mentioned one of them, the Provo Bicycle Master Plan. I also did this kind of cool thing for the Mountain Land Association of Governments, which is the metropolitan planning organization for Utah County and Wasatch County. And they just had this pot of money. It was probably like $20,000 a year. And they would just call me up, anybody in those counties, and they could just like ask us questions or ask us to fix a problem for them. And so that brought a lot of really awesome opportunities to just meet and work in so many different communities that I wouldn't have worked in just through the kind of conventional paid consulting gigs. I was the lead designer of Cougar Boulevard. Woo, Cougar Boulevard. Of 200 East, just south of campus here, and of 300 South in the Mazer neighborhood. Then after I left Alta, after about 5 years, I went back to the city, back to the transportation division as a full-time employee at that point. And the reason why I did is I wanted to be closer to the people, closer to the process, and have more kind of doing rather than just planning or engaging. Now that has a lot of downsides too. It's very messy. I live and work in Salt Lake City, and so I go to a public meeting one night and I see the same person who screamed at me at the grocery store the next night, right? So definitely some pros and cons of that. But again, managing more of these big projects, not hemmed in by the budget of my contract, but really the budget of that project, and ensuring that it was the best project that it could be for the communities that we were serving. So we turned 900 South into a smaller road and added a trail on the side. We added the Folsom Trail, the 300 North pedestrian bridge, which the Provo Frontrunner Station bridge is modeled after. Ours is glass though, and the elevator car fits 2 cargo bikes in and then out, so you don't have to back up your cargo bike, so it's better. Just kidding. I used it on the way here. It was the first time I had used Provost Bridge. It's pretty good. Then at sort of at the tail end of my time at Alta and while I was at the city, for the first few years I taught at the University of Utah in their College of Architecture and Planning. And oh, you guys would have loved this class. It was the best. It was called Planning and Designing for Walking and Bicycling, or Designing and Planning for Walking and Bicycling. I should know the name of my own course. But it did so much more than that, right? It wasn't just like, here's how you build a trail, here's how you paint a bike lane, here's the sidewalk ramp engineering standard. It was the whole process. So I'm going to show you all of the topics that we covered in my syllabus. I highlighted the ones that I think would be especially beneficial or of interest to you, as we talked about equity, communication, civic engagement, tactical urbanism, which we'll talk about and define a little bit later, public health and the benefits of walking and bicycling, data and how you measure performance, which we'll also talk about, kind of the psychology of it. It's not just, oh yeah, this is a great idea, everybody agrees, we're going to do it, but how we, I don't want to say educate because that sounds kind of condescending, but how we meet people where they are and then bring them to hopefully an outcome that serves them and serves as many other people as possible as well. And then the funding and not just the fundraising side of it, but the kind of the capital funding, municipal finance side of things. It was awesome. And then I had my second kid and realized I couldn't have 3 full-time jobs, so just reduced it to 2. Then a few years ago, I moved over to the Public Lands Department, where I am now. And it was a leadership role, so that was a great growth opportunity, but again, something totally new. Not just trails, not just streets, but parks, open spaces, recreational facilities, something that I'd worked kind of adjacent to, but had never fully gotten involved in. So now I manage an $85 million parks bond and another roughly $120 million in other capital projects. So pretty big portfolio throughout the city, about 70 active capital park improvement projects. And then on the staff side, manage 7 landscape architects and 3 planners. And this is the bond. This was such an interesting, I'd never done this before, but they hired me in August, and there was an election in November. And it was the end of August and the beginning of November. So it was like 2 months to get a public education campaign out there, follow all of the election law rules that I had no experience with before, had a lot of help and a lot of really wonderful support in doing that. But it passed. It passed in November of 2022, and 72% of voters voted yes on that. So with that bond, we're able to make these kind of generational improvements in parks and open spaces. So now, kind of switching from my biography, I guess, to the how and why of engaging the public in their infrastructure projects. You may have seen this before, and I'm gonna, for this section, because it is pretty interactive, I'm gonna like walk around the room. So if you sat in the back thinking that you'd be farther away from me, it's gonna backfire, I think. And let's hope this continues to work. Okay, so there's kind of 5 basic levels of community engagement, how you involve people in those public projects. Over here, and it's not like the left is bad and the right is the best. They're just different for different projects and different phases of different projects. So over here on the left, inform is still engagement. You're giving information, they know when things are going to happen, but there aren't a lot of opportunities to change the outcome. It's just information. On up to empower, where maybe the city doesn't know what we want, maybe the public doesn't know what they want. So we're going to come together with kind of a blank slate and try to make it together. In between, consult is asking those questions. Hey, we're thinking about this design or this design. Which would you like? Involve is, we kind of want to solve these goals, and we have these tools. Can you help us come up with some designs and getting people together? And then collaborate is kind of a mix of involve and empower, where you're putting a little bit more of the power to choose the final design maybe, or to choose what the tools are, or the location, or the budget. in the hands of the community. And again, all of these are great and should be applied in different contexts and different phases. Where it can go poorly is when you apply the wrong one to the wrong phase. So if you had I don't know, let's say a freeway going in, right? You wouldn't spend 10 years designing it and then say, okay, everybody, construction starts in a week and we got to demolish 60 homes. That'd probably be a bad project to just inform the public on. You would probably want it to be in here somewhere, and frankly, in my opinion, if it's something that impactful, all the way at the top. Okay, so I'm going to talk about kind of my favorite way of engaging people, which is telling stories. Because I think people are, and I'm going to move over to Aaron's side, I think people are kind of naturally storytellers and story hearers, and it's something that like resonates with us at our core. So we tell stories visually, orally, on social media. This is, I guess, a modern type of storytelling. We like TED Talks, or we used to. Nobody watches TED Talks anymore. Or maybe they do. We love reading stories. We love hearing other people's experiences, applying them to ourselves, and maybe moving them around a little, shifting them. And that's great. I think this is a great example. If anybody took physics in high school or maybe even college, having to put into practice or demonstrate those physics principles, right? You can't just take a test and say, yeah, I'm a bridge designer now. You have to show, you have to feel how it works. You have to fail a bunch of times. You have to have your balsa wood bridge collapse under the load that you put on top of it 20 times to finally realize, oh, that's how physics works. And often it takes those stories, visual, tactile experiences to really click for us. So this is kind of how we do projects, at least in the public sector, definitely in the private sector as well. So we want data. We want to know that the decisions we're making are necessary. We want good design. Design dictates behavior. If there's anything you take out of this lecture, it's that design dictates behavior. You can't tell people that the data exists. You can't ask people to behave nicely. You have to design, in my case, streets or parks for people to be pro-social, safe in that either urban environment or communal environment. And then finally, with data, design, and an assessment of behavior or a goal of a better behavior, like safer driving, then you make a decision. I don't think that you can say, we have data that shows that people are driving 20 miles per hour above the speed limit. Our design is letting them do it. Their behavior is unacceptable, but we don't want to make the decision to impede that behavior because it would infringe on their freedoms or their God-given rights to drive as fast as they possibly want wherever they want to. There's research that shows that the living room is as intimately tied to people's sense of self and sense of place as their front yard. So let's say you have your living room arranged just so, right? You've gone to the furniture store, you know exactly what you want. You've painted it the right color, and then somebody comes and changes the street in front of your house, and it eats up half of your front yard, right? Your beautiful landscaping. People have the same visceral response to that kind of change, even if it's in the public realm, as they do to somebody just opening up their front door and rearranging their front room. So with that in mind, it's essential that we consider those public spaces for the greater good of the general public, but that it affects each individual as well. When my wife and I were first married, we tried to paint our kitchen. We wanted this color. And we thought, oh, well, we went to the paint store and it looked like that at the paint store. And then when we painted it, it was this color. Has anybody ever had that happen before? It happens all the time. Lighting is different. you have it compared to other grays instead of other blues or other greens. What should we have done? We were brand new homeowners, had never done this before, had never bought our own paint before. We probably should have tested some paint out, right, on the wall to see what it looked like in our house. We do this all the time. We watch previews so that we know what the movie's about. So this is an approach that we took when I was in the transportation division to redesign a street. Rather than just show people a design, like a bird's eye view design, we just tried to imitate the design out on the street. So you can see these cones here. The cones were sort of indicating where the new edge of the curb was going to be, where the new center line of the road was going to be, and very importantly, where a new traffic circle roundabout was going to be. When we went out to the public the first time, it was my first week back at the city, and we had a workshop, and we said, hey, we've redesigned your intersection in your street. Isn't this lovely? And everybody came unglued. And they were like, that's not what we want at all. That's not going to work. There was a lot of like, you don't know what you're talking about. We've lived here for 30 years. It's the traditional responses, but they're very natural responses because they have. They've driven in and out of that neighborhood every day for 30 years. So instead of saying, okay, we'll go back to the drawing board and we'll come up with a better design to pitch to you, we said, okay, tell us what your ideas are. And they came up with like 20 ideas. And we said, okay, which 2 of these ideas do you want us to test? And they said, oh, test. Well, that's pretty low stakes. We're not investing very much money. It's not permanent. If we don't like it, we can take it out. And it was really interesting to see how different the response was when we were just testing things than when we were pitching something as, here's our final design, this is what you're going to get. A lot of people that were pro roundabout, in theory, hated it in practice. And almost all of the people who were anti-roundabout before the practice, after they walked and drove through it a couple of times, were like, hey, don't tell any of my neighbors, but it's actually pretty good. And I was like, oh, well, that's great. It also helped on the staff side, too. You can see in this picture the fire chief here, and Station 5 battalion chief, and Station 5 in Salt Lake City is right there. They have very large trucks that they need to operate, and sometimes when they attend design review meetings, they immediately say, nope, that's not going to work. Our truck won't fit through that. So instead of getting to that point, we just said, well, why don't we test it out, and you can pull your trucks out and drive around it as many times as you want to. I should say that the other alternative that we tested was closing off this very funny 5th diagonal leg of this intersection completely and just turning it into a 4-way stop. It was a nightmare. People were backed up the hill forever. Everybody was honking at each other. It was not good. But when we had the fire chief out there and he saw his trucks go through it, they went all the way around like 3 times. They went up the hill. They went back down the hill. And then afterward, they were like, yeah, it's fine. Don't even invite us to the rest of the design review meetings because it'll be fine. We said, great. So it saved us a lot of time. There's their their largest turning radius going around the roundabout and giving us the thumbs up. So we measured it. We measured where the cones were and just made sure that we didn't make something that the fire truck wouldn't fit through. And then after we did the test for about a week, we reported back to the public so that it wasn't just a believe us, trust us. It was, here's what the data shows, right? Going back to that data and being able to report. So 78% of people, there were about 500 survey responses. I should have said this. There was a big sign leading up to the intersection that said, new intersection, give us your thoughts. And then after the intersection, that said, done with the intersection, still give us your thoughts. And so people logged on and they gave us their very honest feedback about how it went. And it was great because it helped us understand how it was really going to work instead of just how we believed it was going to work. But a lot of people were very positive about the implementation of this kind of pop-up intersection. Most people that drove through, walked through, biked through, took the bus through the roundabout loved it. And it was, as you can see there, the most popular of either closing that 5th leg, keeping it as it is, or the design that we originally pitched to them during my first week at the city. even though we reduced the amount of space on the street by about 30%, cars were actually getting to where they needed to go faster. They were driving slower, but they were getting there faster. There were fewer stops and starts. And then during the closure, we did an analysis of how much traffic it diverted into the neighborhood, just in case that's the one that we chose, so that people wouldn't say, during the test, all of the traffic from this street went by my house instead. And what we found was, no, only about 30 to 90 more people of the thousands of people that drive on that street every day were cutting through this neighborhood during the closure. So then we built it. We built the roundabout. Let me see if there's a better picture. Yep, right there. We built the roundabout, and if you are familiar with this location, it's where the whale is now. So it had many benefits, right? Traffic benefits, sure. Safety benefits, absolutely. Travel time benefits, yes. Art benefits, totally. I mean, there's a church around the whale, a literal church. But the most important thing was that as soon as that project started, all throughout construction, and as soon as we did the ribbon cutting, the community felt like it was their roundabout because they had made the decision. They proposed the idea, they tested it out, they expressed their feelings about it, and then ultimately they got what they wanted. And they got what they wanted because the city listened in that creative way. When we put the roundabout in 2021, there was about 2.5 years where there was no art inside of it. Until the Arts Council decided, we want to put some art in there. It's kind of a cool place, cool intersection. So they polled the community, and the community said, they polled the community about what their vibe was. And this community used to have head shops and record stores and coffee shops and kind of a grungy movie theater. And all of the yuppies now that live in that neighborhood are like, oh, we're so unique and eclectic and like funky and weird. And so that's what they said in the survey. And then the Arts Council was like, are you sure? Are you sure you're funky and weird? Because we're going to put a whale in your roundabout. And then everybody came unglued and they were like, no, whales don't belong in Utah. Be careful what you say when you engage with the city or decision makers, because if you say that you're funky, you're gonna get something funky. So they put in the whale. In the intervening time, some gnomes showed up, and there was a gnome versus whale fight for a while. The whale was not as popular in the beginning until they said, we're gonna paint it a rainbow color. This is the whale and the gnomes peacefully coexisting, as they do to this day. There's a marathon around the whale now. It's called the Whale-a-thon. It's 630 laps of the roundabout. Timely. There's Halloween costumes. The whale helped us get the best snow year in decades. Praise whale for this glorious day, says Wasatch Snow Forecast. And there are stickers, which you can buy at many of the local businesses on this street featuring the whale. Obviously, so many benefits to engaging the community in the projects that are going to affect them most, but not stopping there and really striving for projects that make the community better in ways that we can't do in a top-down approach. And then we reported back. After a couple of years, we collected more data. With those improvements to that street, with improvements to the bus route on that street, ridership increased 260%. In May of this year, more than 37,000 people walking and biking used this trail that's along this street. Obviously, that is a little bit different than the roundabout. Same street, though. 37,000 people. That's incredible. That's almost as many cars as University Parkway has every day. Obviously, that's a day versus a month. But we're talking walking and biking versus driving. And I think that that's amazing. 20 new businesses, sales tax revenues outpacing inflation even during construction. And again, like I said earlier, slower speeds and equal travel times. So you have to report back. You can't assume that just because you know it works, that everybody else knows it works. Reporting back also helps other projects succeed because they'll be able to point to something and say, yeah, I know that that was awesome. That was a success, rather than creating that narrative in their own heads that it wasn't if it was, or that it was if it wasn't. I'm going to shift briefly, and this is kind of my wrap up before I'd love to take your questions. But I kind of want to talk about my why. Like, why do I do this? Why do I want to go above and beyond in community engagement or in design, or why am I a public servant to begin with? So I'll have a couple of quotes, and then I'd like to read actually part of a sacrament meeting talk at the end to kind of wrap up. So this is sort of everything that personally motivates me, I guess, even if it's a professional expression. I think that we have this opportunity and responsibility to create what Martin Luther King called a beloved community. Brigham Young instructed us to make beautiful everything around you, to build cities that angels may delight to come and visit your beautiful locations. Dorothy Day, a famous communitarian and founder of the Catholic Worker Movement, said that we should live in accordance with the justice and charity of Jesus Christ. I saw this tested a little bit when a year or two after we built the roundabout, I decided to move into the ward that is next to the roundabout, and everybody who screamed at me for a year then had to hear me give this sacrament meeting talk that I will read an excerpt. It was a little uncomfortable for everybody involved, I guess. Mostly for the people who screamed at me. King Benjamin in Mosiah 4 said that we should impart of our substance to the poor. And I think that we can interpret that literally or figuratively. I think our substance can be our expertise or our willingness to help, or our design credentials, or our community engagement and civic engagement credentials. Elder Gong in October of 2021 General Conference said that as disciples of Jesus Christ, all are equal with no second-class groups. Our Good Samaritan, Jesus Christ, promises to return, and miracles occur when we care for each other as he would. And then I'd like to just briefly read this snippet, if you'll permit me, from the sacrament meeting talk that I think sums up this presentation and kind of my personal motivations quite well. God's desire is for us to build up Zion through the pure love of Jesus Christ. Zion, perhaps in our contexts as civic engagement students, as that I'm adding this part. I didn't say that in my talk. Public input experts, politicians, engineers, geographers, public health specialists. Zion isn't a place or a thing itself. Zion is built when people are of one heart and one mind, have no contention, envy, or lusts, live in righteousness, have no poor or rich, and have all things in common, deal justly with each other, do not enslave or imprison each other, and are converted all unto the Lord. To simplify it, I believe that societies that have built Zion are unified with one another and with God, peaceful, righteous, egalitarian, confident, and satisfied in what they already have, honest, free, and without titles or privilege. And in order to build Zion, who we are must be motivated by love. Among the Nephites and the Lamanites in 4th Nephi, there was no contention because of the love of God which did dwell in the hearts of the people. I also would like to address the opposite of building a collective Zion. That is individualistic, selfish thinking. Ignoring collective needs in favor of one's own needs is contrary to the Lord's plan and suffocates our ability to love others as Jesus Christ would. God is not the creator of classes or of castes, of tax brackets or of prisons or tribes or property values. That one got, you should have heard the hush in the crowd. That was not a good one. Gated communities or rivalries. And I included an emphasis on rivalries because it's the Thursday after the Holy War. We are the creators of those things. We choose to divide and label ourselves. Our heavenly parents will do no such thing to divide us. They and their only begotten Son, Jesus Christ, are pure love. So why do we do it? Simply to avoid doing the often difficult care work and love that the Lord requires. Antisocial and uncharitable behavior, selfishness, protectionism, nationalism, faithlessness, fear-mongering, greed, and self-serving are all rooted in toxic individualism. As these inclinations progress into habits, we may find it easier to ignore others and exclude them from our neighborhoods and social groups. As we do this, we restrict our own ability to know them and then to love them, and then ultimately to give to them of ourselves as Christ would. This kind of individualism is contrary to God's commandments, which, as Christ taught, can be boiled down to 1, love God, and 2, love each other. Shunning these individualistic traits and learning to be better, more communally minded people is one of the reasons God gave us this mortal probation, and I believe one of the reasons why I have the job that I have. In order to truly love people, the one essential prerequisite to building Zion, we have to know them. And to know them, we have to see them, interact with them, and speak with them. And this is my conclusion. This is also why I'm so passionate about, in my professional life, about creating these egalitarian public spaces. If our communities are legally divided and intentionally designed to create exclusive zones of people who are already alike and already comfortable with one another, it's quite easy to choose to not know others, or worse still, not care about them. And not caring about them is simply not loving them. Great communities have incidental, casual, social interactions designed into them. Public parks, for instance, or corner stores, benches, restaurants, libraries, bookstores, etc. I would posit that well-designed cities, those that physically offer the social opportunities necessary to develop love and community, are essential to building Zion. And it is our responsibility as professionals and as students, as members of our communities, and as engaged stewards of the earth, to bring people together, to make sound decisions together, and to work toward that Zion that is filled with the pure love of Christ. Here's kind of my call to action. Here are a couple of readings if you're interested in these. But my call to action is in everything you do, whether you're a participant in these kinds of conversations, these civically minded conversations, whether you're a project manager, or whether you're in charge and you have power to make decisions, that you consider yourself equal to everybody else in that process. I think that we can learn a lot from living and working in our own communities because we have to live with the outcomes of those decisions. But I think that that result shouldn't require us to live in those communities. I think that that is something that we can do as we become ourselves, personally and professionally, better members of our communities as a whole. And with that, thank you for your time, and I'd love to answer about 7 minutes of questions.
This is a very Salt Lake specific question. Oh, thank you. Very Salt Lake specific.
Oh, yeah.
I can repeat. I'll repeat it back too.
This is my diaphragm. Salt Lake specific question, but given like pretty recent passage of SB 195, you had UDOT kind of take over some of Salt Lake streets. What's the future with like these tactical pop-up projects given that UDOT's kind of breathing down Salt Lake's neck right now?
Yeah, SB 195 was passed in March, and it says that Salt Lake City can't reduce the number of lanes on certain streets in the city, and it can't narrow any lanes. The narrowing is crazy because for the last 15 years, even highway engineers have said that lane narrowing or lane width has no impact on capacity. But that's not the question. UDOT has actually been a great partner. They didn't want SB 195, in my opinion. They have done amazing data collection for the last 6 months and actually presented last Wednesday to the Transportation Interim Committee. If anybody's in for like an awesome 2-hour presentation by the UDOT director, it's amazing. Basically what their report said is that the last 10 years of Salt Lake City's projects have produced no or negligible increase in congestion on these streets where these projects have happened, that have reduced maybe road space or number of lanes by a significant amount. It's also said that the public sentiment is really tied to like construction woes. They're like, we really wish it would be faster, communication would be better, access would be better, but we like the result. And that was true among commuters as well as people who lived in Salt Lake City. So what the future holds, I don't quite know. I haven't worked in transportation for a couple of years, but in my conversations with my colleagues, I do understand that there are some projects that are on pause that can't move forward because they envisioned a lane reduction, even if it would have improved traffic performance. I know that it will require a lot more coordination with UDOT than it has in the past, and maybe even a sign-off, but Salt Lake City still does have control over its own streets. It just has more steps to go through to prove kind of what we proved on many of these projects, that they are successful and beneficial to the community. All right, thanks. Yes, does the baby have a question or do you?
I have a question,
Okay.
Unfortunately. So in my experience, most Americans are just by default very opposed to any kind of unfamiliar infrastructure.
Yeah.
So you mentioned kind of involving them in the testing process. Do you have any other like successful strategies in terms of combating NIMBYism?
I think Americans we have a very young country, and so there's not a lot of like good infrastructure or good bones to rest on. At least there wasn't by the time the car arrived in many of, especially our western cities. And so we were like, oh, this shanty town of cardboard and plywood, we can tear that down and build a freeway. They weren't, destroying cities that were thousands of years old. But I think everybody worldwide, us included, are inherently resistant to change because change is scary and change is different, and mostly change is something that we don't necessarily have control over. And I think if I was to give one piece of advice, it is to give that control, as much of that control as you can, back to the communities that you serve so that the outcomes can be what they actually want rather than what kind of the reflexive decision-making or remarks might be, right? I think a roundabout is a great example. If you had polled people in that neighborhood before this project started and said, do you like roundabouts? I bet less than 50% would have said yes. But if you allow them to suggest that idea or to try it out with basically no consequence, then the feelings or the sentiments or the comments that you're going to get are going to be very real comments rather than reactive or conservative or just I don't want change kind of comment, rather than something that can be productive, which leads to better projects because it can be a creative design process with the community if we just give them the right tools, the right words, and the right circumstances. Thanks, that was a great question. Yeah.
I just had a quick question. So I think it's like the same thing with the UDOT question maybe, but just like, so you talk a lot about like kind of, I guess, democratic or grassroots looking at like surveys when it comes to like the example of the roundabout. So like what happens when it's like, I guess, financial interests or like I guess more top-down interests, like influencing decision-making and planning? Are you like trying to reconcile both of those, like the neighbors that are living there and the interests, or is it just?
That's a good question. It happened on this project too. Once we said we're going to do a roundabout, we actually found out that it was going to remove about 22 parking spaces. And those 22 parking spaces were not residential parking spaces, they were business parking spaces. And I didn't know at the time, because I didn't live there and hadn't engaged with that community a lot, but there was already a lot of tension between the residents and the businesses. And so when we proposed it, the businesses came unglued, the residents didn't really care, and it was the residents that we had engaged with the most, or that had been most engaged in our process. So we sort of had to switch modes and go into, business owner mindset, thinking about the economic side of things, where are the other parking spots that they can use, what can we change about the design to kind of alleviate those concerns. Ultimately, what we did, they kind of whipped up a big frenzy. And there were about 150 people who attended a community meeting, and they were all very concerned about parking spaces. But I knew that only about 4 businesses would be minorly impacted by the parking space loss. So what I did is I printed out a giant map of the area that was probably from that green poster back there, maybe to this portrait, and just wrapped it around the room and marked all of the existing parking spaces in green and all of the ones that were being removed in red, and then labeled all of the businesses. And as people came to that meeting, really hot, there were like 3 TV cameras there. Before the meeting even started, they sat down and they were looking at the map, and they were like, wait, this doesn't even affect me. This is just you 4 over here. And I think that helped to kind of calm everybody down. But then we had a very productive conversation on how do we replace those parking spaces, or many of them, elsewhere? How can we find a good... to maybe answer your bigger question of like business interests or donors or money in politics, I don't know that I have the best answer for that, because I'm proudly not a politician and have never accepted money from anybody other than my employer to do the work that I do. But I bet that it is a very sticky web to untangle. But yeah, that's kind of the experience that I have. Thank you for that.
Thank you, that was wonderful.